In October 1949, Mao Zedong had won the Civil War of China, and with this, he began the process of changing China from a Buddhist state to a communist state. He also began to study the life of Pandit Nehru and also began the process of occupying Indian states. Tibet too was an independent Indian state, just like other independent free state of India, and that is why Dalai Lama had to take a call whether he wanted to go with secular and democratic India or with communist China. The then Dalai Lama refused to go with any of these states, and just like Maharaja Hari Singh, he also wanted to remain independent. Nehruji also gave up the amalgamation of Tibet completely and was absolutely unwilling to negotiate any negotiation with India's one of the most important princely states because Tibet was never fitted in Nehruvian idea of modern India because Tibet was a spiritual center of Hindus. Tibet was the most preferred destination for most of the spiritual masters and Hindu mystics. All the famous sages and saints, at least once in their life, went to Tibet and meditated for a few years to attain enlightenment. And perhaps this was the reason why India's accidental Hindu prime minister who used to call himself a Christian by education and Islamist by culture, and had a personal enmity against the culture and people of this land of Hindus. So he never tried to start any negotiation to include Tibet and was more than happy to disassociate Tibet from their Indian identity. On the other hand, the Communist Republic of China was absolutely undemocratic and expansionist because it is predominant for the existence and the survival of any communist state to keep themselves engaged in war with their neighbors so that they may justify their tyrant rule with ultra nationalist ideology of chauvinism. Mao uh, changed about this nation into a communist state, and now it was mandatory for them to include Xinjiang and Tibet in their territory to win the confidence of the people of China. Our accidental Hindu Prime Minister Nehruji was living a luxurious life in 7 RCR and was nowhere concerned about India. He was rather concerned about his friendship with Advina, rather going ongoing political affairs of India. Dear viewers, he was absolutely ignorant about the fundamentals of communism. If India had any intellectually capable prime minister such as Sardar Patel or Baba Sahab, he would have immediately initiated the process of negotiation to amalgamate Tibet with India because Tibet is one fourth of China and the most elevated plateau of the world. With its inclusion in India, uh, our forces would have reached on top, and further, all the possibilities of China to attack India on northern frontier would have died out forever. In 1950s, Mao attacked Tibet and slaughtered over 8,000 soldiers of Tibetan army uh, on the borders of Tibet. China began to construct roads and infrastructure, and they began to rehabilitate their communist cadres. Uh, and the communist cadres of China used to make the videos in which they were getting a red carpet welcome by the native population of Tibet, and they used to welcome the Chinese Republic Army, whereas the reality was absolutely adverse than that. Mao distributed these videos in global media with a lot of money to their correspondent to show this. Uh, and to hide the slaughter of uh, Buddhists by the army of China. These global media houses and newspapers told the world that the native population of Tibet has now fed up with the Western influence in their culture, and that is why they are giving such a grand welcome to the Liberation Army of China. All the newspapers of India was also very enthralled by these paid Western media reports. Instead of going to Tibet and reporting the reality from ground zero, Indian newspapers were doing copy paste of the fake news distributed by the Western media and their paid correspondent. And they gave us a view that everything is hunky dory in Tibet and India need not respond. Though Tibet was burning. Uh, and Nehruji, by going the reports of these media houses, outrightly neglected the wish of the people of Tibet of their amalgamation with India, and after that, Dalai Lama had to sign 17-point agreement with China. In this agreement, only 12 lakh 28,000 kilometers square area was considered as Tibet autonomous region, and around 70% of the area of Tibet was occupied and included in the territories of China. With this, the first phase of Mao's planning was done. In the second phase of his planning, Mao started the Cultural Revolution in Tibet, in which he broke over 35,000 Chinese shrines and demolished over 600 huge mutts, because these shrines and mutts used to play the huge role in the local administration of Tibet, which Mao wanted to give in the hands of Liberation Army of China. Not only he wanted to replace the tolerant culture of Buddhism with the aggressive ideology of communism, but also used to but also wanted to use the resources of Tibet. And over a million monks were butchered and their women were raped and they were publicly persecuted by the Liberation Army of China. And after which, the, the native population of Tibet began the civil war in Tibet. But before the mighty army of China, these Tibetans could not last, and over 100,000 Buddhists were incarcerated, whereas where they were tortured to death, and the Liberation Army of China used to organize public ceremony to chop the body parts of the rebellion Tibetans. And if any villages used to raise the demand of going with India and used to call themselves Indian, then uh, their food supply and their water supply of those villages were abundant, and thousands of native rebellions committed suicide due to scarcity of food and water. And then the 13th Dalai Lama, along with his 80,000 followers, had to flee from Tibet to avoid their execution. They took shelter in India. No, I think I should not use the word shelter because yeah, India is always their homeland, and it was always their homeland. But the only thing is that, and they realized it after being persecuted by the communist neighbors. After the mass exodus of native Tibetan, the army of China and the Mao Zedong uh, declared the the autonomous region of Tibet as the Republic of China, and included this autonomous region of Tibet in their uh, territories. Before that, the Communist Republic of China had already occupied Xinjiang, and the reason why I used to call it a princely state because till 1940s India had our consulate in the Kashgar, and Captain Ram Sathe used to be the consulate general. Nehru uh, was very keen to bring Kashmir in United Nations, but never made any effort to raise the issue of Xinjiang or Tibet in United Nations Security Council. Instead, with this, uh, he dismissed India's consulate and called back Captain Ram Sathe from Xinjiang and further employed him in Foreign Office. And this is how Nehru gifted Xinjiang to China. After occupying Xinjiang and Tibet, uh, China was all set to include Ladakh to its territory. And Nehru did not learn any lesson from these previous blunders, and still wasn't taking any active participation in the office of Prime Minister because he was rather interested in his luxurious life and his friendships. The borders of Ladakh and Tibet were not determined since the Treaty of Chashul, which was signed in 1842. Ladakh and Tibet had many similarities in their cultural heritage, and that is why they were not concerned about the formalization of borders. And both of these princely states, the natives could have easily entered the territory of each other, and the entire world knew that after snatching two of India's huge states in the territories of China, China will definitely attack Ladakh. Only Nehru was unaware and sleeping. Or should I say, only Comrade Nehru was deliberately unaware because there were many intelligence inputs sent to the office of Prime Minister about Chinese incursion in Ladakh. The troops of Liberation Army invaded in the civil uniform and began to construct houses and roads and infrastructure and made shelter homes within the territories of India. And Nehru was sleeping. China had waged a war against India. They uh, attacked Ladakh and crossed Ladakh and in fact reached to the Kashmir, which is today Aksaichin. After which Nehru was forced to sign Panchsheel Agreement. And on 28th April 1954, with this agreement, Mao wanted to consolidate his position in first couple of occupied princely states of India, the Xinjiang and Tibet. So he wanted Nehru to nullify the status of Xinjiang and Tibet as India's princely states, and India had to dismiss their consultant from Xinjiang and Tibet. And Nehru exactly did what Mao wanted. And after that, India lost from our status of princely states from Xinjiang and Tibet forever. After which, Mao called back his liberation army, but many troops who had already entered in civil uniform remained stay there and kept preparing for the next war. Nehru committed at least hundred of huge blunders during his tenure or even before that. But Panchsheel agreement was the most predominant one. And even though he did not learn any lesson and kept harping the raga of Hindu Chini Bhai Bhai, his policy of Hindu Chini Bhai Bhai caused us a massive trouble and manifested in the lost battle of 1962. In these 8 years, when Nehru was enjoying the luxurious life in seven RCR, Mao was preparing the full-scale war against India, and in 1962, China attacked Indian state of Ladakh with its full force. Although CIA had informed Nehruji way before the attack, in fact, President Kennedy used to who came India and was trying to give him an inside view and all the details of Chinese sinister endeavors in Ladakh. But Nehru was not interested in our national security. Instead, he was rather interested in president's wife and niece. These facts are well documented in the book of Sandeep Dev, titled as Kahani Communist. My friend Deepak Madeshia had made a video on it, and I'll try to share the link of that video in the description box of this video. Uh, when China attacked Ladakh, instead of passing the order of retaliation, Nehru was wasting time in exchanging heated words with Sardar Patel. And not only this, in fact, Indian Army was worst equipped and incompetent in comparison with the any other army of any sovereign country. The huge part of Indian budget was being sent as the personal expenditure of Nehru, and the armed forces did not even have those boots which could last in glaciers. And in this war, India was defeated, and China captured Minsar on Ladakh on northern border and the Aksaichin of Kashmir. And they also purchased half of Kashmir from Pakistan occupied Kashmir, to link uh, to form a new region which is known as Aksaichin. This state was very important to link Xinjiang with Tibet. As soon as they entered in Kashmir, they began to construct roads and infrastructure, and in fact, they made it in a very quick time. And this is how China invaded and deceived Nehru third time, or should I say, Comrade Nehru deceived India once more. Friends, only Tibet is one fourth of China, and Xinjiang too is equally big in size, in its territorial size. If somebody else, whether Sardar Patel or Baba Sahib, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, would have elected and became the Prime Minister of India, because Sardar Patel got 12 votes out of 14 Congress committees, or even if Subhash Chandra Bose, who had made the Azad Hind Fauj of 60,000 freedom fighters, would have become the Prime Minister of India. Xinjiang, Tibet, Aksaichin, POK, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, Balochistan, Bangladesh, etc. princely states would have easily included in Indian territories, and today we would have become far superior than China and perhaps competing with the United States. Under Nehru's regime, India lost half of its social, economical, political, and cultural strength. But the loss of Tibet pains me the most. In fact, I'm more concerned about Tibet than POK, because Tibet was the spiritual capital of India, and whosoever wanted to seek the spiritual process and to initiate enlightenment, Tibet was the only destination. From Lord Shiva to Buddha, from Shankaracharya to Abhinav Gupta, it was the karma bhumi of all the great lords and deities. The loss of Tibet was not just the loss of India's largest princely state, but it was the loss of culture of yoga and meditation as well. I can never forgive Hindustan's first accidental Hindu Prime Minister for giving away Tibet to Communist Republic of China. Indeed, he was even bigger cuts on India's forehead than Mughals and Britishers put together. The well-known author and poet of Hindi language, Dr. Sampurnanand, once described the three essential characteristics of a nation to be called as a nation. First, it must have the land of its own. Second, it must have the people of its own. And third, it must have the culture of its own. And that is why when any leader of a nation don't recognize the culture of the land as his own culture and the people of the land as his own people, then his nationalism becomes just a plunder of the land and resources. Friends, in the next part of this documentary, I'll tell you about the history of Indo-Pak Wars. Stay tuned.